And we're live. Hi, it's Francis Wade here at the Time Blocking Summit. I'm also from Two Time Labs and Schedule U, as you probably know. And this is the first core session in a series of four that I am pre-recording for the summit. And the idea is that these four will be sort of the required building blocks for everyone who attends the summit. They're the ones that will give shape to all the other sessions. They're the ones that will sort of provide a foundation. So let's jump right into the first core session. And as you can see, it's called Defining the Challenge. And my recommendation is that you start the summit by completing this particular session first. And let's see why. Okay, so you probably, as someone who is signed up for the summit, came here because you are impressed by what you've accomplished with time blocking. Most people who pick up the technique think it is pretty good. And the experience comes because pretty much they're new to the idea. They're doing it for the first time. They're putting tasks in their calendar. They're seeing things get done. Whereas before, they had them lost in a list of some kind or lists and things weren't getting done. However, once that new technique phase wears off, something happens. I would call them strange things. And they're not what you'd expect based on what you've heard advertised about time blocking. No, not so much. Not as awesome as it was before. And why is that? No, you actually start to experience the return, perhaps, of some unwanted symptoms. Now, I'm not going to say this is true for everyone, but this is true for those who have been time blocking for a while, that the initial bloom did wear off, and what set in was surprising. You know, some of the things that you thought you had already dealt with and had already disappeared from your experience are now coming back. And well, why are they coming back? And if you're just starting time blocking and you're still in that sort of honeymoon phase, the not so good news is that this may happen to you also. So pay special attention. Just start to notice when they do, because we're going to be talking about how to get past that initial loss of freedom, that initial excitement, that initial thrill, that really good feeling that you got from implementing a technique and seeing it work so quickly. So the unwanted symptoms start to creep in. You feel as if you're falling behind. But specifically, there are some practices that must be implemented for time blocking to work. And here are three of them. One is that you have to set up a daily schedule. You have to think about what you're going to be doing each day, every day, unless you're only time blocking the occasional, very occasional item. As soon as you start to time block more than the occasional item, this becomes a chore. So does the daily shuffle and dance, which means moving around the tasks in your calendar when something unintended happens, when a disruption takes place, and all of a sudden your calendar doesn't look like the day that you had planned, and you have to do something to somehow restore the integrity of your calendar so that it somehow resembles the day you thought you were going to have, or the day you now think or now realize you're going to have. And another practice that you've got to pick up is to deal with estimates, your ability to estimate how long tasks take. Planning fallacy, as you probably know, is very real. It's a tendency to underestimate how long tasks take. And compensating for this lack of skill is a major challenge for those who start time blocking. So these are three practices that quickly become burdensome, that take away that initial thrill. So if you've already experienced them, you may have asked, well, is it just me? And we're here to tell you that no, it's not. Here you're going to find all kinds of people, lots of people, who are also have also experienced the same return of symptoms that's so unexpected. Should you ignore them? Well, here are the options if you decide just to keep going and ignore what's happening and ignore what your system is telling you in the parts that aren't working. Maybe you could just go back to doing lists. This is what some people do. They decide time blocking doesn't work or it doesn't work for them and they revert. Some just soldier on, they just try harder using what they've been doing up to that point, believing that it's just a matter of persevering for long enough and eventually it'll sort itself out. Some think it's a matter of the wrong app, so they go looking for a new one or a different one or a upgraded one. And then some just give up the guru that they've been following. If it was me, I apologize. And they go look for a different guru. They think that there's something wrong with the advice that they've been getting. Well, none of these really work. And the reason they don't work is that they don't address the new skills that are required to do time blocking. This whole summit is based on the premise that there are specific skills needed to engage in this technique effectively. And unfortunately, most people aren't providing the answers that you would hope to find from first-hand experience or from data or from experiments. In other words, there's really no answers as to what to do once you started, either coming from content creators, coaches, researchers. Very few people are talking about that stumbling block that happens in the first few months of time blocking. Most of the articles, at 99% of the articles I've read, and I've read a few hundred on time blocking, they're all meant for the person who is not time blocking, and they are an attempt to convince the person who's not time blocking that they should try to do it. So they're all versions of, let's say, sales pitches are sort of a tough way to say it. You know, they're from very well-meant, well-meaning content creators who are using the technique, it works for them, and they're willing to evangelize the idea to lots of other people. And so the vast majority of the articles out there are really very basic, and they just basically say, try it, it works. They don't go the next step and say, well, what happens when it stops working? The very basic, simple time blocking. But at the same time, you're here in the time blocking summit, so I'm going to assume that you've not given up on the technique. You sense that it has promise for you, that it's the way that you could scale to the next level of accomplishment that will allow you to manage a whole lot more tasks, do a lot more projects at the same time, expand your capacity to fulfill your dreams. That there's something about your potential that remains untapped with respect to your use of time blocking. And the question is what? And you may be here in search of the kind of answers that will open up a new vista for you, a new possibility. If so, you're here in the right place. Because I know that you at some point consciously decided to start time blocking. This is not a technique that people fall into. It's not one that they typically pick up in their teens. The fact is, you taught yourself time blocking as an adult. You tried all the techniques, you got yourself to this one, you deliberately decided to try to place tasks in your calendar and manage them from there. That's a level of sophistication that very few have, I'm glad to tell you. At the same time, my observation is that the people who get to this point are those who do create lots of tasks. But they don't do that because they're just have a lot of spare time on their hands and they're kind of idle. And no, it's kind of the opposite. They're people who are driven, people who want to accomplish goals. They're a little bit type A often in the sense that they are very driven, very inspired, want to make a difference, and they see that their own improvement could be a possible obstacle. That if they don't improve fast enough, they're not going to get to the point where they can accomplish all their goals. So they're very keen on improving themselves, but not as a narcissistic kind of let me do it just because I want to get better. It's all in service, often in service of something greater. And they typically have a pretty balanced view of who and what they want to serve. It's not just about the job or their career. It's also about their health, their family, their relationships, their spirituality, their well-being, all aspects of their life. they want to accomplish great things in many, if not all of them. And they see time blocking, or the decision that they made to start time blocking was all about accomplishing more in these important areas. So if that rings true any at all, you're definitely in the right place. At the same time, I'm here to tell you that it's not enough. There's more. There's more for the further way to go to get what we're promising here in the Time Blocking Summit, which is a transformation. See, I want to get you from the place where you can see and notice these unwanted symptoms that I've been talking about, the stumbling blocks that occur when people start time blocking long enough. No longer have it be a problem that doesn't have any solution, that nobody's talking about, where all you can find are the evangelical kind of articles, where you're not alone. Many time blockers who I've met are really doing the technique alone. There isn't a guild of time blocking. There isn't Schedule U that we offer here at Two Time Labs is the only school I know of that teaches time blocking in a systematic way. And you wouldn't be confused. No longer have this feeling of wanting to have answers but not having them and not knowing why the approach you're using isn't working. The transformation I want you to have is so that you leave the summit in 3 days with a very clear pathway to where your transformation can occur and what it should look like. One that's not just even about where you are or the next step that you need to take, but one that's actually sustainable, that you become a different person, which is the whole definition of transformation. Not that you just do different things, but you become a different person from the inside out. And that you have answers that are simple and straightforward, but at the same time not silly and simplistic, not overly condensed or overly superficial, so that they don't ring true. There are real difficulties here, and the way to overcome them is really to go through them, not to avoid them. So I speak with a little bit of authority in the sense that my own path to the time blocking I do today using an auto scheduler was anything but smooth. So in the 90s, I was someone who dabbled a little bit in time blocking, but I mostly used lists. And this was mostly on paper at the time. I discovered the concept of time blocking in 2001. Taught techniques on ways to do it. Did that for a few years and then moved to Jamaica in 2005. As you can hear from my accent, I was raised in Jamaica. Although I was born in the States, I was raised in Jamaica, so I identify very much with where I am right now. And after I moved back, I had a bit of a panic. And the reason I had a panic was moving from the United States, where I was living in Florida, to moving in Jamaica was, as you know, a move from a developed country to a developing country. And I found myself floundering with all that I had to do, and I wasn't keeping up. And I hadn't had that experience for years, maybe since college. And I did some reading, picked up the GTD again, and decided I must have gotten something wrong. There's something wrong with that training that I did back in 2001. I needed to go back to have lists. So I reverted back to using lists. That led me into a double panic. Things got even worse. It took me a while to realize the technique I was using before going back to lists, time blocking, was the right one. It's just that I needed to implement it differently in this circumstance. So I moved back to doing time blocking again in 2007. Started to teach it to others, and then finally was introduced to an AI, artificial intelligence driven auto scheduling app for the first time just after I finished my book in 2014. And that's what I've been using ever since then. So zigging and zagging. And why did I zigzag like that? It's because I didn't have a roadmap. I didn't understand the pathway I needed to take to have the improvements I needed to have so that I could survive this move back to Jamaica and all the new demands on my time that I was now experiencing. So the summit This presentation, everything you're going to be learning is all about providing a very clear pathway, the one that I didn't have, really. And to do that, I'm going to pull on a couple of things that you already know or that you already want. So one thing that I know you don't want is some kind of cookie cutter one-size-fits-all answer from me or any of the other presenters. So I'm going to assume that you already know that, and everything I say and that they say is going to be built on this notion that there is no one answer. But given that there is no one answer, how do you provide answers to a diverse group of people? We shall see. And the second is that the answers that we give have got to be practical. So this is no graduate seminar, and this is not about theory. This is about one block on top of the other and cement in between. This is about doing things differently. First, there is a change in thinking, yes. Better yet, there's a transformation that happens first. But ultimately, where we want to get to is that there are steps that you can take, steps that you can understand you need to take once this summit is over that make a practical difference to your life. So I'm going to suggest 3 steps in core session number 1. The first is to replace the guru, which is what I'll focus on in a minute. The second is to have the kind of knowledge that you need to have to do a full and in-depth and meaningful and impactful self-evaluation. And the third is to use a method of evaluation throughout the next 3 days and for the rest of your life, but certainly for the next 3 days. So let's talk about replacing the guru first. So I mentioned the training that I led in 2001 and how it led me to time blocking, and it actually is quite different from the kind of training I do today here in 2019, and here are a few of the ways in which it's very different. So back in 2001, the training I did was assumed that you, the listener or the learner, would be very passive, and that I would dole out a whole bunch of detailed behaviors, very prescriptive, and that if you were a good student, what you would do is follow them. So it was the very opposite of what I'm talking about today. It was one size fits all. And the real wake-up call came from me when my mother did my training, and then a few months after I asked her how is she using the stuff she learned that I taught her. And she said, well, not really using any of it. It's not really for me, And I was, I don't have kids, so this was kind of like my baby. The work I do is like my children, my child. And I was not devastated, but I was taken aback. I tried to convince her otherwise, of course. But my work with her didn't make a difference. And so I thought about that long and hard. And when I started to rethink the kind of training that did not work and what would work, once I returned to time blocking in 2007 or so, I realized there was a new kind of learner that I needed to speak to. I'm going to speak to you in the same vein, that you're going to be very active. And I recommend that you not approach this particular summit the way I've approached most summits, which is it's a good chance to turn something on in the background while I do my email. I pay partial attention and I don't give it everything. I certainly don't close down whatever else I'm doing, and I'm multitasking the whole way through. So that doesn't work for the kind of training that is now required. Learners need to be very active. And I need to relate to you as if you are going to be very active and very interactive. And if you were here in front of me, we would be actually having a kind of dialogue. But my assumption is that you want to be active. And during the summit, we'll give you opportunities to be very active while you're in session and while you're outside of sessions. But anyway, the point is that you're not just someone listening with a accepting ear, just waiting to hear the details of what you need to do from someone who thinks he should be a guru. But you need to be listening very critically. And I have some evidence that shows that you're already a critical thinker, or else you wouldn't be here. But you need to own the changes that you are going to be making. The way anybody in my training, my live training, owns their training, the way I ask them to do this, I ask them to be very critical. Because at the end of the day, it's their improvement. It's a difference that they're going to be making. And the critical skill that they're missing is one of self-evaluation. So instead of having a guru or someone tell you where you're at and what to do next, the answer to the question of how do you get around one size fits all is that you dramatically increase the skill of learners or listeners or your audience in doing self-evaluations. And that's what this summit is all about. Now, I know because you're here at the summit, you already have some practice in doing these self-evaluation. You had to do a big one if you were ever a follower of GTD, or if you ever, as folks who use GTE say, implemented GTD. So the book was written at a time when paper was prevalent. It's primarily based on years of paper techniques. There was no mobile internet at the time. And the book clearly said 3 things go on your calendar, which make up your hard landscape. Only time-specific actions, day-specific actions, and day-specific information. And furthermore, David Allen goes on to say you need to trust your calendar as sacred territory, reflecting the hard edges of your day's commitments, which should be noticeable at a glance when you're on the run. Those you absolutely have to get done on that day. So if you know any of this thinking, if it's familiar to you know what he's saying is don't do time blocking. Period. That was a very clear message of his book. Well, the fact you're here, if you've been exposed to DTD, which I imagine you have been, you consciously made the decision to forego that particular piece of advice. GTD exists for me on 2 levels, principles and practices. The principles are amazing and right on the money, and they were a breakthrough. The practices, however, haven't stood the test of time as well. And this particular practice, keeping a hard landscape and having a sacred calendar and not putting anything on your calendar that's not going to be done, has to be done at a specific time on a particular date. In other words, the opposite of time blocking. Following that piece of advice, giving it up, forsaking it, and following your own route to do time blocking means that you've already done a very big evaluation and you've decided that you're not following that particular practice. So you already know how to do this. You're probably one of the only friends that you know of who actually do time blocking. This is not a technique that everyone is jumping all over and doing. They probably have their version of using their list and using their memories, and if they catch wind or if they've caught wind of what you're doing, they'll probably think that you are slightly nuts. So you're willing to stand out. You're willing to be a maverick, which is great because that prepares you for where we're headed here. Being your own guru. What would it be like to be your own guru? Well, you'd have to not just live life, but you'd have to be able to step outside of your day-to-day life and analyze it with this critical eye. In other words, you'd have to be really good at doing self-evaluations because, as you could imagine, gurus are really prone to fooling themselves into thinking that they're all that on a bag of chips. So for you to be your own guru, you've not just got to be smart and knowledgeable and self-reflective, but you've got to be able to escape your own thinking traps so that you can be vigilant for the kind of behaviors that would make a difference. Now, that takes something. That's not mild. That's not small. It's not an everyday way of being. But guess what, guys? That's where we're headed for the next 3 days of the Time Blocking Summit. So specifically, what skills and knowledge are required? So in the next steps, we're actually going to get into that. Let's talk about the knowledge first. The knowledge it takes to do a self-evaluation in time-based productivity. And in particular, what I'm going to focus on, given that we are in a summit, in a transformational summit, is I'm going to be focusing on the kind of knowledge that you need that would support this transformation. It's not necessarily, it won't be, I'll say, informational only, or entertaining only, or engaging only. Instead, this kind of knowledge and experience should encompass all three and a whole lot more. So you should be able to use it right away, and you should find it somewhat challenging to use. So here's the first piece of knowledge. And if you've not done a course from me before, you would maybe not have heard this term, because it was coined by me here at Two Time Labs. It's that of a time demand. So a time demand is an internal individual commitment to complete an action in the future. In other words, it's the kind of promise that you make to yourself. It is a variety of tasks, but it's not the same as a task. I'll explain in a minute. What sets it apart is that a time demand is completely owned by you. You have full agency, in other words. Or in other words, you own every single time demand that you have ever created. Every time that you've promised yourself to do something in the future, that psychological commitment is one that arises from your deep intent. So time demand has this very different ring to it than just a task, often, although it is a kind of task, as I said. And here's the evidence and reason why one of the reasons why I had to coin the term is that it's a piece of work that has been given to someone, a job for someone to do. So this is a definition from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, where a task is something that someone can give to someone else. So time demand cannot be given to someone else by definition. Time demand comes only from inside. Task can also be used as a verb, as you know. You could task someone with something to do. The same thinking that somehow it could come from outside of you. So for the entire 3 days, whenever you hear one of my presentations, you're going to hear about time demands. Because time demands are separate in my mind and different from tasks. Okay, so that's the first piece of knowledge, and we're going to be using this extensively. All right, so where did they come from? Well, did a lot of research in this area, read a lot of academic books and academic journals. And if you read my book, you can dig into the depth and where this particular idea comes from. But from multiple sources, I sort of cobbled together a theory. And the theory is that children are taught the concept of time. They don't really discover it in the sense that they find it on their own. They have to be taught. And maybe you may recall when you were taught between 7 and 8 years old. Amazing if you can. Most people can't remember. But shortly after, in the ensuing years, you started to create time demands. And these time demands, you realized, were the key to fulfilling your objectives. You couldn't do everything immediately. So this is not about just following impulses. You realized that you needed to set something up that would allow you to complete and further your commitments if they're going to happen at some point in the future. So you started to create time demands. In order to keep them alive, because you probably learned and realized really early on that just creating a time demand wasn't enough, that there had to be some kind of habit or practice around these time demands to prevent them from just slipping back into the ether from whence they came. And you started to teach yourself habits and practices. Majority of people I've met and taught and spoke with and researched, no one ever sat down with them and explained any of this. Maybe you had a role model if you were fortunate, but you still taught yourself how to keep a time demand in existence over time. What emerged at the end of it all was a system for managing time demands, a reliable way of keeping them in existence. So if you were here in front of me, I would actually have you go back and try to recall, and we would talk about where you started to create time demands and what your early experiences were like. But the good news is that we human beings are actually limited in the way in which we can manage time demands. And there are 7 fundamentals that are on this page that describe the ways in which we human beings manipulate time demands. So time demands are in red. We start off by capturing them, and they're captured in memory when we're very young, when we start working with time demands. As we get more sophisticated, we start using other locations like an administrative assistant, for example, or a parent, or a paper pad, or a digital notebook, a tablet, an app, whatever it might be, a digital voice recorder. But a time demand is captured in what I call a capture point. At some point later in the future, hours, days, weeks, emptying, the time demand is removed from the place of storage, temporary storage, and it's acted on in one of 5 ways. So it may be tossed, which means it's revoked. It's actually deleted, and the commitment that lay behind it is withdrawn. Or it's added to a list, like a to-do list. Put on a schedule, like a calendar, Google Calendar, for example. Some element of it is stored, for example, in contact sheet or a list of passwords. Contact sheet meaning, like, for example, Google Contacts, or in your address book. Or you act on the time demand immediately. So in the process of emptying, you have 5 moves. And then there are also advanced fundamentals, and this is a little bit meta in the sense that they're not about acting on time demands, they're about changing your behavior so that you're better able to execute your time demands. So interrupting is defined as stopping what you're doing so that you can check in and see, should I keep on doing this task, or should I change or switch to another task? So interrupting is stopping your flow in order to make a decision about whether to continue or not. Switching is about what you do once you stop, once you reach the end of a task, for example, deciding what to work on next and whether to complete the current task and move on to the next one, which one to move on to, because you probably are facing 100 or several hundred tasks, which one is the best one to do next. Warning is about setting up internal flags in your system so that you'll know when something is about to break, like a light on your dashboard, the role that plays. So warning is setting up very visible reminders that, not reminders, but triggers that tell you that something is going wrong. And then reviewing is the act of sitting down on a regular, semi-regular basis to review the workings of your system to see, is it performing the way you want? Okay. And then there's 2 modes that we recognize mostly here at 2Time Labs that you can be in at any point in time when you're actually executing a time demand. So we call these the executables. Habiting means that you're following a habit, which means that it took almost no effort to initiate a particular behavior, like brushing your teeth. And flowing is entering the flow state, doing deep work, deliberate practice, whatever it might be that engages your attention fully. So when you're flowing, you're not habiting. When you're habiting, you're not flowing. When you're executing time demands, the idea is that you're doing one of these 2. Okay? So these are all the 13 different moves that we have as human beings who create time demands and then try to execute them on a daily basis. What it allows us to do is to do a kind of evaluation, which this is the first sheet that sort of gives you an idea what an evaluation might look like. If you're just to evaluate the fundamentals and the advanced and not to do habiting and flowing, you might end up with a profile that looks like this, where white belt is the lowest level of skill and green belt is the highest. And as you can see, this person is mostly white belt. They have a few yellow belt skills, but what they've done is to evaluate their skills according to some external criteria. Okay? More on this later. Okay, and here we see two complete evaluations which are sitting side by side, Andrea and Jerry. As you can see, they have very different skills. If you're just to look at the page of skills, Andrea has higher skills. Let me zoom in so you can see what some more details about what this sheet looks like. So it has the same belt system, white, yellow, orange, green, white the lowest, green the highest. And it has capturing, emptying, tossing, acting now, storing, scheduling, and so forth. And so her skills are, she has lots of green belt skills, which means that she's operating at a pretty high level. However, if you look at Jerry has more white belt skills, as you can see. So one of the results of us being self-taught is that we end up with this variation in skills, high variation. No one sits down with a teenager and says, how are you doing in developing your fundamental skills? It's all by luck. And I've gathered data from a few hundred participants in my programs to show that there's some correlations, but the variation is tremendous between individuals. Okay. All right. So when it comes to making improvements, the kind of improvement I just pointed out to you is a skill by skill improvement, where you could improve your skill at capturing. We call it a tier 1 improvement. That's mostly of what we're going to be focusing on here at here during the summit. You'll hear lots of talk about improving individual skills. But then there's another level, which is system-wide improvements. And this is a little bit like being able to understand that if your watch is losing 5 minutes a day, or 5 minutes an hour, it's not working properly, that you know how to evaluate the watch's performance and go in and make some changes. You won't, for example, change the wristband, because you know enough about watches to know that changing the wristband doesn't change, as far as I know, doesn't change the loss of 5 minutes per hour per day. Well, the same applies to your time-based productivity system via the fundamentals. So here, for example, just to blow up Andrea's skills once more. So Andrea has some real strength in capturing, emptying, and tossing. Green belt skills. By contrast, she's not so strong at interrupting, switching, warning, and reviewing. She has a lot of yellow belt skills in that area. So if you were Andrea, where would you focus your time and effort? Where would you seek to make improvements? Well, that could be a very, very simple question. Or it could be something that's more complex. Because these skills are not just standalone skills. They're not silos. They're all interconnected. And it could be that improving a skill like capturing even more than I've described here than a green belt could have a knock-on effect that has a far bigger difference, Pareto kind of difference, on her entire system of managing time demands than an improvement in the ones that she has a yellow belt in. So it's not as simple as just saying, I'll just work on the weakest areas. It's not as simple as that, because this is a system of interconnected cause and effect relationships. The way a car or a clock is an interconnected system. So making tier 2 changes requires more knowledge, more sophistication, and a better understanding. But this is where we want to take you to during the summit. Developing some tier 2 understanding, so that when you now go to make changes to your time blocking, you're understanding that the skills of time blocking aren't standalone skills, that they all are interconnected and make a difference with each other. Okay, and then tier 3, which we probably won't get to at all in the summit, is that you make improvements in the way you make your improvements. So it's this very meta, that you manage yourself in a way that allows continuous improvements to be made effectively and ongoingly. In other words, you don't stop making them. So for the 3 tiers, we're going to be focusing most on the first 2. And the good news is that as a human being, you're already making some of these improvements. That if I were to sit down with you long enough and I were to interview you and were to really look, we would find examples of all 3 levels. That doesn't make you very different from most people, however. Everyone's making 1s, 2s, and 3s. However, it's the manner in which they're being made that's ineffective. So let's talk about a systematic way of making these kinds of improvements, as opposed to the ad hoc way that we've taught ourselves based on our teens. Or how do you make, once you've done an evaluation, how do you do the kind of evaluation that then leads to systematic change? So we came up with the ETAPS approach several years ago. So it's E, I'm going to go through them individually, so I don't need to do that at the moment, but there you can see that I'm going to go through each of them. So E is evaluate your current skills. So we won't actually do an evaluation, start doing evaluations, in this session. It's going to be done in course session number 2. So I recommend that you, as soon as you finish this one, you start that one. And that evaluation of your current skills, I'm going to show you a way to do it that isn't really geared towards time blocking. So I'm going to use an example. This is one I always use to show someone, how do you evaluate your current skills with a view to making improvements? And the example I have here is of capturing. So I'm not going to go through this in detail because the point of the time blocking summit is not the 7 fundamentals, which include capturing. But this is what I would present to a learner in a typical program of mine, either a live program or an online program. And I'll tell you some more about the availability of those in just a few minutes. But they respond once I've trained them in how to do this evaluation by evaluating their current skills. So they say, okay, so I'm a white belt in the first skill and I'm a yellow belt in the subsequent 3. This is Bob who has done this evaluation, which means in our way of training that the overall belt he has for capturing is just a white. Why? Because your skill always takes the lowest belt, pertaining to a sub-skill, I should say. Okay, so Bob has decided, all right, so if I'm at this level, then there's 4 changes I could make right now. I need to decide which of these 4 changes are the ones I need to make. I could go from white to yellow with respect to the first behavior, or I could go from yellow to orange with respect to these other 3 behaviors. So I have 4 possible immediate moves, immediate improvements. Okay? So that's evaluation. So targeting has to do with deciding what's the best way to progress in making these changes. So you can imagine there's an idea, as you probably know, you can't try to make too many habit changes all at once or else you will fail. Instead, you've got to decide the best sequence. So there are 9 actual possible changes that Bob can make on his route from being a white belt to being a green belt. And I've colored them in here so that we could separate them. But here are the 9 possible changes. So we know that there are 4 he could make right away, but then there are 5 that he could make afterwards. So there's 9 possible changes that he can make. What's the best sequence for him to make them in? So this goes back to tier 2, right? What's the best way, the best sequence? What would give him the biggest bang for his behavioral buck? Well, let's make it simple and say, okay, for the sake of just having an easy example, how about if Bob first says, okay, I'm going to do them in sequence. I'm going to complete the white yellow belt first, then the orange belt, and then the green belt. So if he decides to do that, it means that he has to make that one change to move up to a yellow belt. He has to make this change first. Then, if he's going to move in sequence, he's got to make these 4 changes to get to to orange, and then these 4 changes to get to green. So That's just the decision that he made based on his understanding of how his system works and his need as a professional. It's not the right decision. You may decide that, you know what, that first skill, I need to be a green belt in that skill right now because without that skill, I can't improve the others. That's also valid reasoning. So the decision about what to improve, how fast to improve, is one that's not simplistic. And what a good coach will do is that they'll help you to sequence or lay out these changes over time so they look something like this. So they're spread out. So you're not trying to change more than 2 behaviors at a time. So that it appears doable, even easy, the number of changes you want to make. So you don't fall into the trap of thinking that you're Superman when in fact you're more like Clark Kent. You create a game that you can win, in other words. So our training, my training or my advice to you is that as you sequence out these changes, that you give yourself time to win. And finally, that you support each of these changes. So one great benefit is to have a coach who would help you to do that, someone objective. You could also have a partner, someone that you're working with. Once again, and I'm going to be mentioning this throughout the summit, the value of doing the improvements that you're making and accelerating them with other people, with other peers, with other people that who are also in the same game as you are. Gamification makes a big difference in supporting changes, habit tracking, penalties and rewards, whatever you may work for you to support each of the changes. Because one of the things I've noticed in the training I've done over the last couple of decades is that we overestimate the power of our willpower, yeah, and we underestimate the effectiveness of these external supports. Okay, so we often set up plans that are not necessarily doomed to failure because they're too aggressive, but fail because they just don't have enough support. Okay, so if you want a real deep dive into the methodology I just shared, there's 3 places you can get it from. One is from my book, Perfect Time-Based Productivity. And you'll find different ways of accessing that here at the summit. And I also do have registrations into the My Time Design Plus. This is my online training. It's going to be offered here at a discount also. And you'll find more information about that before the summit is over. And I also have a live training, a 1-day training called New Habits Foundations. The next one is actually going to be done here in Jamaica, and I'll provide some more information about that as we go along. But point is, these are the 3 places that you can find out how to use that methodology I just described. In particular, my book goes into much detail. Book is also available in Spanish, French, and Portuguese, and also an audio version. So, your mission, if you choose to accept it over the next 3 days, is to gain very specific knowledge, kind that I've been pointing at. So I'm not the only person who's going to be giving you specific knowledge. That's the job of all of the folks who will be presenting. Matter of fact, it won't even come from just the presenters. It'll be built into the games, for example, in the interactive game lounge or page that I'm going to have available. It'll be in the library that we'll have of resources. It'll be in the minds of other people who are taking the summit along with you. This knowledge can come from all these different directions, and I'm going to challenge you to use all of them. And then second part of your mission is to leave here with better self-evaluation skills, but not to see it as sort of this one-off occasion. Self-evaluation is going to be a lifelong, career-long skill, because the changes that we're talking about making today in time blocking, in 5 years' time, everybody's going to be doing it, and it's going to be old hat, and who'll care? We'll be on to the next set of skills. But the same self-evaluation skills will still be needed. It's just that they'll be applied to something different. So I invite you to see it that way, the second part of your mission. And the third part is to develop a draft plan that covers the next 12 to 24 months. So once again, I'm going to be asking you and coaching you to stretch out the changes that you want to make so that they are doable and so that you can win. And that you don't try to cram them all into the next 2 months and then end up failing as a result. So let's call this your first very, very, very big win. You've come through, you've picked up this very, very big mission. It's the first sort of mountain to climb here at the Time Blocking Summit. I've described a whole bunch of new ideas, ways to implement them, a whole very different kind of approach that's, I would say, it's just sort of becoming popularized, and understanding it and then committing to this kind of mission. If you've chosen to accept this mission, it's a very big win. This kind of commitment means that you can get the most out of this summit and have it make a tangible difference. So we've just finished the core one, which is defining the challenge, the first part of our overall agenda for the next 3 days. Coming up next will be core 2, and I recommend that you take core 2 next. Once core 2 is finished, you'll have the means to, and a way and a method to elect, cherry pick the sessions that would provide the most value for you over the next 3 days. So we pulled together some of the best presenters and really thought leaders in this area. We've all specifically tasked ourselves with providing you this transformation, and the sessions are geared for that. No, it's a mistake to just randomly pick up whatever session happens to be, catch your eye, or a person that you like, or, just do it alphabetically or throw a dice. After core 2, as you move from B to C, the green to the blue, what I really want you to do is to carefully choose which elective sessions would move you towards the end objective. Okay? So I'll be returning with the third core session on the third morning, and then the final one will be just enough to send you off on your own, being able to choose your next steps in your development and on your journey. Okay, so you should see this very much as a journey throughout the next 3 days. So anyway, on to the next part of your journey. So the next part of your journey is to take core session number 2. And in core session number 2, you're going to exit that session having chosen one of 4 paths. So each of the paths are very different from each other. Each person would have chosen one that will act as sort of their core principle, the place they want to make an improvement, that would guide their choice of which electives to really tune into during the next 3 days. So I recommend that you finish that core session next, as fast as possible, if it's practical to do so. Grab out that workbook. There are actually some parts that you may want to complete from what we've already done that you could fill out in your workbook, your blueprint. This is your personal blueprint. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then just contact me or log into the community and find out what that's all about. But you should have gotten a link to it. It's a file on Google Docs that you can fill in, fillable file. Then I recommend that you schedule time to be in the summit once you've figured out your schedule, and have it be 100% time. Have it be flow time, not partial attention like I mentioned that I've done, where you're trying to do email at the same time or answer phone calls while you're listening to the summit. Give it 100%. While you're on, you're on. When you're off, you're off. I actually recommend that you put in some times to, like, time off, that you not try to ram your schedule and have it go back to back to back to back to back to back to back. The summit will work best if you take some time to reflect and actually schedule in that reflection time. And then finally, I recommend that you complete the quiz that goes with core session number 1. And the reason why I love quizzes of this nature is that they help you to recall and therefore use what you've just learned. So if you go over to the interactive game room, you'll see a quiz that is related to the topics in core session number 1. That's actually a mistake. It should say core session number 1. But there's a quiz for core session number 2 as well. It's just that you want to complete the one for session number one when you go there next. All right, so let's see if I can just switch back to talking to you personally once again. I'm sitting in front of a mirror and it appears as if the sun has shifted somewhat, so maybe I can just turn off the light. Very bright. But anyway, so I hope I provided a great start for you here in the Time Blocking Summit. Course session number one is the foundation for what we're about to do. In the next session, you're actually going to be doing some evaluations, and from that, you'll be able to design your summit to have it produce the very biggest impact that's possible in the next 3 days. So I'll look for you in course session number two, and I'll sign out from here. All the best and take care. Bye now.